Okay, all right, gentlemen. Okay, so we're starting today, Perek Dalet, chapter 24 of Mesilas Yesharim, right? So we're almost pretty much getting close to the end, right? So this is Bever Yiras Achet, in the explanation of the fear of sin. So again, let's just read through as much as we can, and then digest, um, Okay, all right. So let's see. So hine re'eseinu hamida azois nimnes achar kol hamidos hatoves asher zacharnu adheina. Since we see that this mida, right, mida of yiras chet, is counted among the mida, the good midas. I mean, counted. I'm sorry, after the good midas that we have mentioned until now, right? In other words, yiras chet seems like very basic, but he's saying since we see that this mida appears towards the end, right? Dailonu lehairenu, so that's enough already for us to realize alinyono shiroi shehiyavada inyan nichbad veikri meoi. To realize that it's the concept of this mida is very important, right? Essential, but at the same time very precious, meaning very kind of extraordinary or outstanding, right? And it's very difficult to acquire it. Shekvar lo yuchel hagia elov, because the person is not able to reach this mida elamishikvar hisik kol midas shekodem zichron. That unless somebody already acquired all the midas that we have mentioned until now. Okay, so right away we see this goes back to our kind of ongoing question whether or not this is there's a prerequisites here and there's an order, or you can do things out of order, right? So for some reason he points out here that yiras hachet, fear of sin, is something that is very difficult to obtain, and you need all these prerequisites. Now you could also say that maybe that really, meaning maybe when he mentions that, maybe that really shows that you don't need to. But we'll get back to that. Okay, so we'll come back to this point. Again, just putting it on the back burner right now, that he's saying that Yiras Chet, we see the fact that it appears towards the end, means that it's difficult to accomplish it. And it also means that all the previous midos are prerequisites to it. Amnam tzarech shenaktim. Now, but first we need to uh, um, mention an introduction. Okay, so tzarech shenaktim. What's the hakdama? What's the introduction? Kimine hayira hem shtaim shem sholish. The types of fear are two that are really three, right? Now, if you remember, we read already through this paragraph early in the beginning, right? Because the concept of yira appears in Zehirus, it appears again in Chasidus, right? So we kind of read this paragraph once before in order to give us this full picture. So now we're seeing it from this perspective. Anyway, so Kimine hayira hem shtayim shehem sholish. The types of yira are two that are really three. Ha'achas kalam oid lasigo. One is really easy to acquire, to reach. Ein dover kal kemoino. There's nothing easier than it. V'hashniya, the second one, kosher min hakol, is difficult than anything, right? So one is easy, one is very difficult. Ushlei musa, and to reach its completion, its perfection, kemoikin shleimus godel moed. It's also likewise is an incredible level of perfection, right? So reaching the point of perfection of Yiras Haroimimus, I mean, I'm jumping ahead, right? The second type of Yira is going to be already a high level of perfection. So now he's saying like this: yesh Yiras Ha'oinish. There is something called fear of Oinish. V'zeu hamin echad. That's the first type. V'yesh Yiras Haroimimus, and there's something fear of loftiness, of Hashem exaltedness. V'zeu hamin hasheni. That's the second type. Sheyiras achet. So that's again. So there are two types, and so but he said there are two that are three. So he's saying Sheyiras achet chelik sheni mimen. The Yiras chet becomes the second part of the second type of yira. When the vayar ata and yonam we have delay. Basically, he's going to tell us that even though there are only two types of yiras, yiras ha'oinish and yiras ha'remus, the Yiras HaRoimus is divided into two, and the second part of it, which is really just an extension of Yiras HaRoimus to its ultimate, so to speak, expression, but it becomes so different that it really is its own category, right? So in other words, Yiras Chet is going to be a standalone category of Yiras HaRoimus. Okay? So far, so good. I mean, this is almost like, ABCs of Yiddishkeit, right? So far, so good. So Yiras HaOinish, Kipshuta, so Yiras HaOinish, the fear of Oinish is simple, right? That's he said before that there's nothing easier than this, right? There's nothing easier than this. We'll see what that means, right? We would say maybe it's not that easy, right? So what is it? What is it? A person is afraid to transgress the commandment of Hashem, mipnei, because of onshim asher laveris, because of the punishments that are prescribed for averis. Im l'guf im l'nefesh, whether they are punishments for the guf, meaning physical world, im l'nefesh, whether they're punishments for the nefesh, meaning in the next world. V'hinei zois kalavadai. Certainly, this is easy. He called Odom oihev es atzmai, because a person generally loves himself. V'yira l'nafshay, and he's also afraid for his soul, meaning for himself. He's afraid. He has a self-preservation. Ve'ein dover sheyarchik oisoi me'asoi dover echad yois min hayira. And really, nothing prevents a person from doing something bad, right? Except for Yira, right? Why do I stop? Why don't I eat something that's not healthy? Because I'm afraid of the consequences, right? Why don't I, I don't know, go bungee jumping? Because I'm afraid of accidents, right? Meaning anything that I avoid doing, because I'm afraid of the consequences. Right, so again, nothing distances a person from doing something that he shouldn't be doing. Meaning, that he nothing besides fear that something bad should not come out as a result. Good. So let's recap for a second. So again, so he seems to be saying the reason why it's easy, right? The reason why it's easy is because it's what's the word? It's non-abstract, right? It's very simple to say that, hey, this thing has negative consequences, right? This thing has negative consequences. Everybody understands negative consequences. Don't do A because B is going to happen to it. That does not require any kind of abstract thought. It's very basic, right? Now, obviously, what it means is, right? So why do we still do it? Meaning, why do people who smoke, let's say, right? They know the negative consequences, and they still smoke, right? So what happened to this? Nothing is easier than fear of consequences, right? So seemingly a couple of factors I think are involved, right? One is some people think they can, so to speak, have their cake and eat it too, meaning some people think they can get away with it just because, I can mentally understand that this fear is real. It's not really internalized, right? So meaning he's not talking about whether or not a person is able, like, I mean, right? So if I don't believe, let's say, my belief in Hashem is not so strong, and the article points this out somewhere, is if I believe in Hashem is not so strong, so in theory, I do believe in God. In theory, I believe that if I do the Avera, Hashem will punish me. And in theory, I do not want to be punished. But in practice, right, something maybe is still a question. It's far away. It's distant. Maybe I'll do tshuva. Maybe Hashem will have rachamim. Maybe, I have lots of tirutzim. But it's not that I have a difficult a difficult what's the word? A difficult in comprehending that there is such a concept. Hey, you do this bad thing, a bad consequence will result. That in itself is a very simple, basic concept, that even the most, if you have two brain cells, you can comprehend this concept. That's what he's saying. That's what makes it easy. It's natural. It's natural for a person um, to avoid negative consequences, and it's instinctive. It's within nature. It's within comprehension. That's what makes it easier. Now, if I can't internalize it, okay, that's a different story, right? That's a different story. But the point is, as far as intellectual ability, it doesn't require much ability. Okay, right? So far, so good.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So
I mean, things that are very obvious, don't jump over the bridge because you might die. Nobody's going to jump off the bridge, right? Things that, I don't know, don't eat too much because it's not good for your health. Okay, all right. Tomorrow I won't eat too much. Same thing here. If there was a thunder and lightning in the middle of the day for every head, nobody would be sinning.
right, 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 right. Right. So the only problem here is that making it obvious,
Right.
right? Making it tangible. I mean, it is tangible, making it more apparent. Same thing for release for any again, like smoke, going back to smokers or people who have heart issues or sugar and candy and all of those things, right? Diabetes, it's I mean, we know that, like, I mean, fear doesn't really work on those people because for whatever reason they don't
Hmm.
internalize
No, it
once.
does. Yeah, it does work. Just people that trying to rationalize, not like Hashem gonna forgive or something. Just trying to convince themselves that what they're about to do is not really aware.
Right, meaning, let's say a
So,
smoker, once
so,
a smoker
so,
gets hit with a heart attack, he stops smoking. I mean, he might stop smoking for a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be. After a while, he forgets the reality, and he says, "Okay, maybe it's not going to happen again. Maybe it's safe again." And then
yeah, but again, it's rationalizing. But if he cannot convince himself that that's not gonna happen, he will not smoke. If he's scared enough, he will not. But if
right,
you say, okay, so one thing happened, next time not happen, it's already rationalizing. So you convince
right,
that's not gonna happen. But
good,
uh, but even with aware, as long as you cannot convince yourself that it is not, you will not do it.
right,
Like there's no like pork. There's no way you can figure out, oh, it's not really pork. It's still pork. So you're not gonna eat it. There's no matter how much you're gonna rationalize. So,
right, right. So I'm just thinking more like in terms of, so what's the word? Meaning, what when we're trying to, let's say with kids, teenagers, if we try to fear, make them realize the problem of, let's say, dangerous behaviors, right? Usually that doesn't work,
yeah.
right? Because they already sort of program themselves to disregard those
No. No,
consequences.
because they don't believe it's gonna happen to them. Yeah, it happened to him because he was
Right,
like stupid. I'm good. It's not
right,
gonna happen to me. So there's no fear. But if he not convince himself it's not gonna happen to him, he will not do it.
right. So it's not, but so effectiveness is not about harping on the dangers of something. It's more about trying to make that more, I don't know how to say it, but more real, not more dangerous, but more real, which is not the same thing. Right. Okay, fine. Moving on. Fine. Ve'en yira zuru uyo ela le'amei haaretz. Now, this fear is only appropriate for amei haaretz, ulenoshim, and for women, asher daitan kala, whose mind is light, right? Meaning, meaning, again, he's saying that, I mean, women in general, again, to generalize, probably, again, women in our days are not the same women. Obviously, we're not talking about that, but women probably in general are more impressed by tangible consequences as opposed to some abstract, obscure contemplations. Again, generalizing speaking, um, but again, obviously women are different, just like all men are different. But okay, moving on. But it is not the fear of Chachamim and people of Das. Right? It's interesting, right? So Yiras, just structurally speaking, Chachamim is the opposite of Amei Haaretz, right? And Anshe Hadas is the opposite of Nashim. Right? There are two categories that he said before that are appropriate for this fear. Amei Haaretz and women, and by women he says they're Dait and Kala, right? The Das, they're Das, right? It doesn't mean that women cannot be Chachamim either, right? You could have Chacham, women could have the Chachamim, could be Nevoinim, or so to speak, have Bina, right? But Das is less, is a different type of again, could be on the art scroll. It says that it's an emotional issue for women. That women are more inclined towards emotion. That's what it means by Das, right? So Das is the idea of putting things in perspective, and women could be more emotional, perhaps. Again, generalizing right now in very stereotyping type of way. If women could be more emotional, and therefore, that emotions can definitely shift perspectives, right? For men or women, it doesn't make a difference, right? So, but I don't know if it's a question of emotion. I'm not sure. Okay. Anyways, moving on. Just pointing out the structure. So that's the first year. And now we're moving into the second year. Hamina Sheni Hu Yira Saroimus. The second type of year is Yira of Aroimus, right? Of Hashem's loftiness. V'husha Odom. So now he's going to explain what that is. So let's pick this apart a bit, or pay attention for now at least. V'husha Odom Yirchak Min HaChatoim. So but now you distance yourself from Chatoim, right? It's not just that you don't transgress the Chatoim, as he said before. Right. If punishment means I'm afraid of the punishment, I am going to be afraid of transgressing. Over here, I'm yirchak min hachatoim. I distance myself from chatoim. V'lo yaseh, and I will not do them. Mipnei kvoidoi hagodol baruch shmoi, because of the great kavod of Hashem. Ki eich yochel, right? How can I possibly desecrate? Right? How can I desecrate Hashem's name? So the first, okay. Or, right? He's saying or. Eich yerav liboy shel basar v'dam shafel v'nimas. How could my heart dare, a heart of a basar v'dam, of flesh and blood, who is low and despicable, lasso is to do something, dover neged ritzonei yisbarach, to do something against the will of Hashem. Haboire, who is the creator, v'yisal shmoy, and whose name is raised. Okay, so he's saying two. As far as I see, two things, right? One is, how can I do something that's going to diminish Hashem's honor? And the second thing is, how dare I cross his will, right? How can I do something that will diminish his honor? That's one aspect. And because he says not and, he says or how can I do something that, who am I to go against his will, right? How can I diminish his honor? Who am I to transgress his will? Okay, two things. We have to see exactly what those two things are and why he says both of the. What does he need two of them? V'hinei zoi seyira eina kol kach kala lahasigo. So this one is not so easy to reach. Why? He doesn't. Let's see. Because it will only come to be as a result of knowledge, right, and enlightenment of contemplation on the loftiness of Hashem. Okay, it will come about, right? It will come about only after much contemplation and deep knowledge of the greatness of Hashem. Okay. And at the same time, a realization of the lowliness of man. So that requires perspective, right? So this type of fear is not a natural fear that's instinctive. It that it's a fear that has to be internalized, right? You have to kind of acquire it. And this fear is we mentioned it in the second chelik of Chasidus that we mentioned, right? There was the second chelik of Chasidus was oifen ha'asiyah, right? In the way we perform Hashem's avodah, right? Oifen ha'asiyah, the way, and there was Ava and Yira, or Yira and Ahava, right? So he's saying that was Yira. The Chassid acquires Yira Saroimimus in his avodah. Bo yevoy sha'odam. And if you remember again, it had three parts: hachno, lowering yourself; busha, like bashfulness at the time of avodah; and kavod of holy things, Shabbos, Tamidei Chachomim, basic nesses, all those things. So hachno, busha, and kavod. So those were the three elements of Chasidus, which in itself was an element of Chasidus. Oh, I'm sorry, those were the three elements of Yira, which in itself was an element of Chasidus. So with that fear, a person is bashful. And his trembling, when he stands before his creator to pray. When he services any avodah, right? Even though that was one aspect of the three aspects of that era, right? So that was the trembling and the bashfulness at the time of avodah. Ki hayira meshubachas. This is the praiseworthy yira. Shenishtabchu bo chasidei olam. That the chasidei olam, like the true chasidim of the world, are praised with having such a yira. And this is the yira that Moshe refers to when he says, right, what does Hashem want from you? To fear Hashem, Hashem hanichbad v'anoira hazeh. Right. So again, this pasuk refers to Hashem in two epithets. Right. Hanichbad, the honored, the glorified, the hanoira, and the fearful, which I think parallels the two aspects of fear in the way he defined it before, right? The kavod, right? How I don't want to do anything that will diminish Hashem's kavod, and how dare you transgress His rotzon. That's the kavod and the noira, right? So the two aspects of fear of Hashem comes from these two descriptions, hanichbad v'hanoira. Okay, again, we'll come back to that. So this is the fear that we are trying to explain now. The hainu yiras achet. So I'm sorry. So now we get to the fear that we're trying to explain now, which is fear yiras achet. Yiras achet is like a part, is an element within yiras haroimimus, shezacharna, that we mentioned. But at the same time, it's like its own min. It's like its own type. V'hainu. Why? Then that is kihine in yonahu she'yeh ha'odam yorei v'doyeg tamid almas. The idea of this fear is that a person should always yorei, be fearful, v'doyeg, and worried regarding his actions. Pen nisarev bom eza shemetz chet, that within his actions there should be no admixture, no mixture of shemetz chet, right, flavor of sin. Or should anything in his actions be, whether small or big, that is not fitting to the kavod of Hashem and the loftiness of His name. So again, over here we have the same two factors, right? Two aspects, but only this time it seems like they're flipped. Meaning the first one is saying, I'm worried about that there should be no element of chet in my action. And the second one is I should be worried about that I'll do something that will be diminishing to Hashem's covenant, right? In the previous two examples, the covenant came first, and the rotzon came second. Over here, it's because chet, right? Just the word chet, sin, is meaning going against rotzon Hashem, right? So over here, the rotzon seems to come first, and the covenant seems to come second. Now let's see the relationship between the yira of yiras roimimus and this yira, which is yiras achet. Now it's true that the purpose of both of these types of yiras, they should not do anything, nothing against the loftiness of Hashem's honor. Amnam, right? So that's the idea, right? It's all totally, it all is dependent on Hashem's covenant. Amnam ha'hevdol shebeneim. However, the difference between them, that as a result, that because of this difference, yiras chet is almost like its own standalone type, ubeshem acher tikare, and as a result is given its own name. Who is this? Ki yiras haroimimus, because the fear of roimimus, who b'shas ha'maisa, or b'shas ha'avoda. The fear of roimimus is really, again, that's what he's saying now. We'll have to understand what he means. Is really at the time of avoda, or at the time of my action, right? In other words, I'm learning Torah. I realize that I'm coming closer to Hashem. I have a sense of Hashem's loftiness, and as a result, I have a certain feeling or an expression of charoda, of trembling or bashfulness, right? Of inadequacy, of being so close to such greatness, right? That's yiras haroimimus, and that's why it mostly kicks in, or is b'shas ha'avoda, at the time of service, or b'perak ha'avoda, or in the the general chapter of service. I'm sorry, or b'perak ha'avera. I'm sorry, or at the time of avera, meaning if it's about preventing me from doing sin, right? So when I'm about to do an avera, I remember, wait, this is not with fitting to Hashem, so I would not do this. Right? So it could be either at the time when he's standing up to pray, or to some other service. Then he will be embarrassed, or he will be bashful, yirash, or he will tremble. The yirah, another word for tremble, before the loftiness of the honor of the glory of Hashem, blessed be He. Shoshim is the menace of or when an avera jumps before him, or happens before him, and then he realizes that this is an avera, and then he abandons doing it, so that he should not do anything. They should not do anything that is against the kavod of Hashem. Ach yiras achet. So that's generally yiras haroimimus. Now he gets to explain what actually yiras achet is. Ach yiras achet he bechol eis ubechol sha'ah. Yiras achet is at any moment, any time. Shehine bechol rega hu yoreish pen yikoshel, because at any moment he is fearful that he should not stumble. V'yaseh dover, and he should, and as a result, do something. Or chatzi dover, even half of something. She neget kvod shmo yisbarach, that should be against the honor of Hashem's name. Right. So yiras chet is basically an extension of yiras haroimimus into a lifestyle. Right. It becomes a lifestyle. In other words, you're constantly at, full of anxiety, I guess. Again, right now, I'm going to take this, so to speak, to the most literal expression of it, right? It comes across as being somebody who is really anxious not to do anything that is diminishing to the honor of Hashem, and as a result, he is a nervous wreck. He's always worried. He's always on alert. He's always on guard that maybe he will do something or even half of something that will be detrimental to Hashem's glory. Okay? So Valkain Nikras Yiras Chet, that's why it's called the fear of sin, right? The focus is not even so much on the Roimimus, right? On Hashem's glory. The focus right now is on the little things that are detrimental to Hashem's glory. Because the essence here is to be fearing of sin. That he should not enter, got mixed up in his actions. Machmas pshio, whether it's a result of negligence and not laziness, but weakness. I don't know how to say it. What's the proper English word? Oversight, laxity. Either whether it's because of negligence or laxity, by machmas halem, or as a result of oversight, however it can creep in. So with regards to this, it is said, Ashrei Odom, praiseworthy is a man, mefached tamid, who is always fearful, always afraid, constantly afraid. Okay, so praiseworthy is a man that's constantly afraid. Now, sages said that is with regards to Divrei Torah, in the matters of Torah. Okay. So even at a moment when he doesn't see any stumbling block in front of his eyes, when doesn't matter, his heart still has to be trembling within him. Pen tomun hularaglof, maybe it's hidden, right, next to his feet. V'huloy nishmar, maybe he was not adequately guarded. Right? So again, so this describes, very well, it describes real anxiety, right? Val Yira Zois Omer Moshe, Rabbeinu Shalom. Now, with regards to this Yira, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Uba'avur tiya yirosel pneichem levilti sechato. Right? And this pasuk is talking about when Jews came to Moshe and they told him, listen, you go speak to us on behalf, you go speak to Hashem on our behalf, and we'll listen to you. And he says, you're doing the right thing. Hashem just wants you to have this constant fear al panechem on your faces, so that you should not sin. Right? The purpose of Hashem talking to you is to bring home that reality of God's greatness, so that it will prevent you from doing sin. Kizeh ikar hayira, because that is really the essence of yira. That a person should be kind of shaking, trembling always. To such a degree that this yira never leaves him. Because if it's an ever-present sensation, then he will definitely not come to a chet, not come to a sin. And if it does show up, meaning if a person still stumbles, at that point he is certainly an oines, because he did everything in his power to guard himself, right? All the alarms were on, all the systems were on, everything he did, and if he still stumbled, he must have been an oines. V'Yeshayahu Omar ben Osoi. And Yeshayahu says in his prophecy, "Ve'alzeh abit." Hashem says towards this one I will gaze. El oni unechei ruach, to a poor person and a low of spirit. V'chored al dvari, and he is chored, right? He is fearful over my words. David HaMelech ishtabach b'zeh Omar. Again, David HaMelech was praised regarding this, and he said, "Sorim redefuni chinom Um, Princes pursued me for nothing. But my heart was feared from of your word. Okay, let's keep going a little more, right? So again, the picture that we're getting is I mean, logically to some degree it makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense that I mean, this is what Hashem wants. You know, what happened to the what
Love.
happened to well, love I could work into love into here, but what happened to like a nevuah doesn't come upon a person unless he's full of happiness, right? And mitzvah gedol is besimcha. If he's constantly full of anxiety, so where is his simcha, right? You're gonna have to reconcile that. I mean, I can't imagine that. What's the word? That the person, it's like a person is like in a war zone and he's constantly, seeking, it's a very strange lifestyle. You don't see chachomim. You don't see chachomim. You see, what's the word? You do see from anxiety emanate in this way, but you don't really see gedolim act in this sort of like, what's the word? I don't know. Right? You know what I'm saying? I haven't seen the great
Right.
Doilim walking around with the constant sense of the evil lurking under their feet, because I don't know if that's what, and I can't imagine Ramchal also walked around with the sense of this constant anxiety, right? Or at least not outwardly. So we'll have to see how to reconcile all those other elements.
But then it just is more probably than, I don't know, becomes an awareness rather than anxiety, right? If you,
It could be. I just the words don't sound that because the word sounds ashri odom tomid, right? Somebody praiseworthy is a person who's constantly mefached. Pachad is a pretty strong word.
yeah. I mean, there's a story about Vilna Gaon when he was a teenager. He moved the shell from a piece from garocha by accident on Shabbos on the table, and he fainted. His mom like woke him up, and he saw it again, and he fainted again. And my mom brought him back up, and she quickly ate the little shell to show him that it's still used for it on Shabbos. Then he kind of come back to it. So the sheer side of that, not consciousness out of him, but he wasn't walking around looking, oh, is there anything that I want to make sure I'm not touching anything right now. I'm not moving that thing. Anything that's potentially moves. You know what I mean?
I don't know. It's hard to I don't know. It's hard to what's the word?
Reconcile, right?
No, I'm saying it's hard to draw conclusions from a story. But okay, let's keep going a little more. Now we find this concept by the great malachim, great angels, right? They are constantly trembling before the geus, the grandeur of Hashem. Until to such a degree that our sages said in their metaphor, Nahar Dinur Mehechen Yotze, where does the river Dinur, right? There's some kind of a mystical river, which is part of the judgment that a person goes through, right? And just pointing out that Dinur is really the same letters as Yardain, um, just scrambled. Anyways, Nahar Dinur Mehechen Yotze. Nahar Dinur, where does it come from? Mizeosan shel Chayos. It's from the sweat of the Chayos, right? So Chayos are the highest, or one of the highest angels that are out there, and they're so close to Hashem that they are in constant sweat, so to speak, from that fear, and as a result of that sweat, the river Dinur kind of comes about. Because of this aimon, I use different words of fear, because of this strong fear that is constantly upon them. Pen ya'adru dover cotton min COVID. So again, so what are they afraid of? This now he's kind of adding. What are they afraid of? That lest they omit dover cotton min COVID ve'akdusha haroy lefana. Right? If they don't fully incorporate and transmit the full grandeur of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ubechol shah shenigles hashchina al eze mokam shegia. In any moment, at any time that a shechina is revealed upon any place, kvar road v'roash v'rogas. That place trembled and trembled and trembled. Whatever those three words are, but basically meaning the same thing, right? Right. So Kumash Omer Akosov Eretz Rasha of Shemaim Nofim Nelakim, Boemer, Lu Karato Shemaim, Yeradatum Penecha Horim Nazoil. Again, so these are psukim that are showing that anytime that we associate Hashem's presence with trepidation, right? With trepidation, it's instant. I mean, even right, anytime a person experiences a nevuah and he gets closer to Hashem, so there is this incredible, what's the word? Incredible shock or something along those lines, right? So what is he trying to illustrate over here? He's trying to illustrate that if a person would have real internalization of the distance between him and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and when that distance is bridged, right, that instant, that also becomes, so to speak, a natural fear, much stronger than the fear of punishment, because the distance is so huge, right? So it's only questions of appreciating that contrast of distance and closeness, the distance and closeness, the paradox of distance and closeness that Yiras Harevimus presents. Kol shekain. So certainly, bnei ha'odam, people, sheroya sheyirgazu v'yira should be biyodam shelifnei Hashem heim oimdim. Right. So certainly, people should trepidate and tremble when they have the recognition that they are standing right before Hashem. Tomin, always. Right. So why is this a trepidation? That's always. It's because we are constantly in the presence of Hashem. V'nokel lohem lasois ezedover. So therefore, and then it's so easy when they realize that it's so easy for them to do something she'eino lefi roimus koidoi, that is not fitting to the loftiness of that kavod, is baruch shmoi. Right. So when a person realizes that he's in that presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he also realizes how easy it is for him to be not fitting for that position, right? That inadequacy, right, is very palpable, right? So v'huma shomer elifaz li'iyov ma'enosh ki yizke v'cheyitzta kilud isha. Right? What is man that he's zoicher to such a status? Hen b'gdoishav lo yamin. Even with regards to his holy ones, meaning the angels, lo yamin, they're not believed. V'shamayim lo yizaku be'inov, and the heavens are not sufficiently pure in his eyes. So if the angels are not sufficient and the heavens are not sufficient, so how could a simple human be zoiche to such a lofty status? V'omer, and also it says hein be'avodav lo yamin, with regards to his servants. Again, I think over here, servant is referring to angels. Ubimalachav yosim ta'ala. Af shoichne botei chomer. So certainly those that live in the houses of clay, meaning human, physical flesh and blood. Hine al kein tzarech vadai. So with regards to this, a person certainly needs sheyechra tomid v'yuresh kol odom. A person should always tremble and shake with regards to that realization of the contrast between the human flesh and blood and the infinite Reimus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Af lezois yechad libe v'yitar memekoymai shimu shamoya beroigis koyla. Zoisi hayira ha'amitzah shiroi leisha chosid. This is a true year that is appropriate for a man that's a chosid. Sheti al ponav tomid, that it has to be on his face always. V'lo yisosur memenu, and it cannot leave him. Okay, so that's the explanation. Now he's going to go into chalotim. So let's just dwell for a second about this. I won't say. Hold on. Oh, right. So, question like this. Let's go back to the original question. Meaning when we discussed ANOVA, right? I think we came to the conclusion that ANOVA can technically be a separate track from other elements, right? There was one track called, Zahirus, Zrizus, Nikius, Chasidus, Precious, whatever, all that. That was one track, and improving your avoida to the point of hypersensitivity to little things. And as you progress, you become more and more sensitive to things that are more details, right? First, you're Zohir on the big things, then you become a Noki, you're Zohir, and even on things you rationalize, then you become a Chosid, you become more Machmir, right? So that's one progression. ANOVA is its own track of progression. ANOVA is its own track of progression, meaning as you become wiser and smarter and more, and you internalize, you also become more open to the understanding that a person is less than he imagines himself to be. But what about Yiras Achet? Meaning, can I jump straight from Zahirus to Yiras Achet and bypass all the other elements? Meaning, can I have this aspect of Ashri Adam Mefachet Tomid without fully incorporating all of the other elements of Prishus and Tahara and Chasidus and all of these things? Meaning, right? And going back to the beginning of this chapter, right? He told us, right? Hine Reisenu Hamida Azois Nimes Achar Kol Amidas Hatoivus Sher Zacharnu Adheina, said that since this midah is mentioned after all the good midas that we mentioned until now, we understand that this is a very important and lofty and very essential matter. And it's very difficult to acquire it. A person can't reach it unless he acquired all the midas until now. Right? So, plainly, he seems to be saying that you can't get to this level without all the previous levels. But why is that? Why can't you get to this? I'm saying so I would actually maybe argue that since he has to stay, meaning if he has to speak it out, then it must be that it is kind of a separate track is what I'm trying to say. Meaning he doesn't need to tell me that Chesidus, I don't know how to say it, that I don't know, not Chesidus, but he doesn't have to tell me that Nikias can only be accomplished after Zahirus, because that's self-understood. You first get rid of the known things, then you work on the unknown things. There's a general progression there. When it's specifically when something is not so, what's the word? Consequential, right? When it's not so consequential that he needs to tell us that you're right, maybe it's not so consequential, but being that this thing is so complicated, you're probably not going to get it unless you've gotten this far from all the other midas, because this mida requires so much internalization, right? It's possible that you can internalize and have this sense, right? Meaning nothing is really preventing you, I think, from having this charod, this trepidation in the presence of Hashem, right? Nothing really is preventing you, but at the same time, it is unlikely that you will have that hypersensitivity unless you've accomplished all of the midas that, until now, right? So I'm just saying there's two ways to read those lines, right? When he tells us that you're not going to get this until you've got covered all the previous things, you could read it as like these are physics and it's a progression, and you got it. This mida, which is mida number 9, you're not going to get until you got the previous 8, or just the opposite. He's really telling me it's technically possible, it's just unlikely, right? So I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure which way to read it, but I'm more leaning towards the second way. That Yiras Achet is kind of feels to me right now as a separate thing, because it's a mental, it's much more of a mental thing, right, as opposed to an action thing. Even though it results in my avoiding certain little averas, so to speak, but it's mostly a state of mind, just like a nova was mostly a state of mind, and therefore it could be accomplished technically at any point in the progression. Right? Okay, and the last thing I guess I'll just point out the obvious again is that you have this brisa that's literally like 3 lines in the Gemara from Rav Pinchas ben Yair, right? And then Ramchal builds like a whole, the reason why Pinchas ben Yair mentions Yiras Chet all the way in the end is because Yiras Chet is this third. I'm just putting it in there to understand, to appreciate for a second how much of a skyscraper Ramchal built on 3 lines in the Gemara. Did Pinchas ben Yair like have all of these layers? I mean, it's a little bit interesting to appreciate how much kind of a whole what's the word? I don't know, a whole magnum opus was built on this one brisa that appears at a random place and at a random, whatever. Okay, I guess we'll stop over here and then up again.